there's so much that I wanted to talk to you about. You and I catch up, a couple times a year. We talk fishing, we talk all kinds of stuff. We talk hunting a lot, obviously. But before we get into what I really wanted to have you on, which is sort of your strategy for elk and what you could recommend to people coming out to Colorado or Wyoming or wherever for their first elk trip, I wanted to talk to you about this thread I saw on bowsite.com earlier this year about this woman. I forget her name, but she's a Colorado resident. She shot a mountain lion, posted the pictures online, posted one picture of her hands all bloody and she's smiling, and it blew up and the anti-hunters took it and they used it to try to take away some of your hunting opportunities in Colorado. And I saw you weighing in on this thread because those two factions of hunters in that thread kind of went one way or the other, where it was like, we don't care what anybody thinks about us. We need to be loud and proud. And then there was your side that said, guys, we have a PR problem and we have to use some tact in how we represent ourselves. And I thought you won that hands down, but it got kind of nasty, and there were some people that weren't getting the message there, were they?
Well, no. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, a lot of hunters don't understand, is that nationwide polls show that the huge majority of non-hunters who are voting non-hunters, by the way, which is really important in referendum states like Colorado, the huge majority, like almost 90%, approve of hunting for food. They approve of hunting in an ethical manner, but they don't approve of quote unquote trophy hunting. And part of that maybe is our fault because we've been outflanked by the anti-hunters who we've allowed to define what is and isn't trophy hunting. And if I recall, this young woman said that they ate the lion. Yep. And it was a legal hunt. And of course, in Colorado, we know that we're saturated with lions, so there's no problem. But there is a nationwide perception that hunting for food is good, trophy hunting is bad. Yeah. And whether I don't believe that that's valid, but it's true. And perception is reality, as we know. And that's what a lot of hunters don't understand. They think that we can just pound it into people and fight like MMA fighters, and somehow we're going to win. And we know when we had our election here in Colorado for bear hunting, it was an emotional, it had nothing to do with science. It was an emotional campaign by the other side. And we managed to get 31% of the vote, despite the fact that far less than 1% of people in Colorado ever hunt bears. But we still got slaughtered 69-31. So it's a perception problem that we have.
Well, it is. And, the guy's arguing that she shouldn't apologize for anything. And she didn't do anything wrong. Like that's true. She didn't break any laws. She legally hunted. I'm all for that. But we also have to read the room and understand what's going on out there beyond our circles. And the reality is some of these animals, it's just not that popular to hunt them in the non-hunting public. And those are the people, we always frame this as a hunter versus anti-hunter debate, but it's not. It's us versus the perception that the non-hunting public has of us. And if they have the perception that we're good people and we're doing this honest thing and we're eating the meat and we're out there for the right reasons, we win. If they look at it and they conflate it with just pure trophy hunting, which is not popular, we lose. And so we have to be careful about managing that image.
Well, yeah, and a perfect example is the lady who is leading the charge here in Colorado to try to ban mountain lion and bobcat hunting. And she even admitted that she has no problem with ethical hunting. What she doesn't want to see is bloody, grinning photos that to her represents everything that's wrong about hunting. And this is a woman who's trying to stop a segment of hunting in Colorado. And I think that she represents a lot of people. And when we put something on Facebook that's shared for the public, not just for our friends who understand, but are shared with the public, we have to understand also that there are search engines that find these things and pluck them off, and they go viral, and it goes from your 20 friends to 10,000 within minutes.
Yep.
And it creates a perception. Nobody knows the story behind this. All that they knew was that this young woman had posted a picture with a mountain lion, and she was grinning and laughing and holding up her bloody hands with her painted fingernails. And it just gives the wrong view to my neighbors who don't have a problem with me hunting, but they don't hunt themselves. Their question would be, why do you have to kill a mountain lion to eat it? Even though she said she did, why do you have to kill a mountain lion to eat it when you can kill deer and elk
Yep.
and all these other animals?
Yep. Well, so there's two things going on here, I think. You talked about the bloody hands and the Facebook photo. I mean, that was the one that got people the most, right? She's smiling with bloody hands. She's celebrating. She's excited. And I get that. The average person doesn't. And the argument against you or your side was, hey, she didn't do anything wrong. She should be proud of this. She should flaunt it. And it's like, that's not how this stuff works. People don't like looking at that. And they don't like seeing every aspect of the hunt. We can manage what we show the public. We can show cleaned up animals in respectful situations, and we can do a little part there where you're not showing them some of the uglier side. Because the thing about this is we're killing stuff. It is ugly a lot of times. And I thought about that when I was going through that thread and I saw everybody going back and forth. I always think about even the deer thing, right? I look at whitetail hunting because that's my world, and people are very accepting of that. They're very accepting of it. But if we started showing lots of videos of deer getting shot in the spine and dropping down and some of the uglier deaths that occur, that could change. We could lose some of the ground we have on that, where we take it for granted that, yeah, people are always going to be okay with us hunting deer. They see them everywhere, but we could literally be our own worst enemies there if we didn't manage what we show. And so I think that's an important distinction to make there.
I think that's important, and also the distinction between, unfortunately, quote unquote, trophy hunting versus hunting for food. And if that had been a picture of this gal with a deer, a whitetail, with blood on her hands and so forth, it wouldn't have become the poster child for the Stop Lion Hunting campaign. Yep. And I interviewed Mike Makarian a few years ago for an article. Mike Makarian is at the time, he was the EVP of the Humane Society of the U.S., and I believe he was the CEO of the Fund for Animals. And he was laughing about how we give them so much ammunition from our own videos that whenever there's a campaign, that all they have to do is use clips and photos from our own stuff to use that. And that's what we saw in the bear campaign in Colorado when we lost spring bear hunting and hounds and baiting. They used our own videos and our own pictures. And he told me that they are planning to put bow hunting on the ballot in one of the bellwether states like Washington, Oregon, maybe Colorado now. And when they do, he said they're going to saturate the airwaves with the worst of our own videos that we put out there on the web.
Yep.
So it's critical that we as hunters, I know people think that we're hiding something and we're being cowards and whatever. No, we're accepting reality that non-hunters control our fate in their hands at the voting booth in many states.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary to hear that. And the one thing you mentioned that I think we should touch on too, if she was holding a deer, we wouldn't be dealing with this. But also, if instead of a she holding that lion, it had been a man, we wouldn't be dealing with this the same way either. This thing we see where people generally accept guys like you and I out hunting, we fit the mold. When you see a woman out there, the Melissa Bachman thing with her African lion is probably the best example of this. They don't want to see a woman doing this stuff. They don't like it.
No, it makes them crazy. And if anyone takes the time to go on to some of the anti-hunting or anti-trophy hunting websites, you'll see that it does make them crazy that more and more women are hunting. And they denigrate the women. They try to say that, well, women are just doing this to try to get approval from men and subjugating themselves to men and all that. I mean, they're creating a perception that's not true. But as we know, perception is reality. And if you say the same lie over and over and over again, pretty soon it becomes accepted as fact.
Yep. Well, that deal with Melissa really opened a lot of people's eyes. And I remember a good hunting buddy of mine called me after that started to blow up with her. And he said, "This is amazing." He said, "I can turn on the Outdoor Channel and watch 5 lions get shot a weekend." and nobody cares. But she's a good looking girl. She looked really good in that picture, and they don't like seeing it. And I remember I talked to Melissa after that, after it kind of blew over a little bit, and she told me that there was a woman who came and was camping out in her car in front of Melissa's house on the street, like crazy stuff over that. And it just doesn't happen with guys. And so I look at that and I'm like, that anti-hunting side, that's so hypocritical that they're like, we hate hunters, but we really hate the women who hunt. Like, why are you making that distinction? And it's just, they can't stand it.
Sure, because the women, and they know very well, just as we know, that the single mother raising a family segment of our society is huge. And,
Yep.
and on one side, it's a big reason for the decline in hunting because we don't have the fathers hunting and taking the sons and teaching them and all that. But when you have single moms that hunt, that take their kids, they all of a sudden become the enemy.
Yep.
And they have to do everything they can do to tear them down. So
Yep.
when you have the combination of a woman trophy hunting, that's like the evil. That's like the lowest level of hell.
Yep. Well, and that's the trophy hunting thing. Personally, I know pure trophy hunters. I've dealt with a lot of them in the industry, and I'm not like a huge fan of them either. I mean, I don't think they should be stopped. I think they should be allowed to hunt and do their thing. And if you can hunt for whatever motivation you want, but when that side gets so much of the airplay and so much of the attention, and I get dragged into that, it drives me kind of nuts because I know people who are in it just for the heads. And, it's not like they're out there breaking the law or wasting the meat or anything, but to feel myself get associated with that more. And it's happened to me a lot because I'm in the hunting industry and I get it, but I understand why people look at trophy hunting, especially the like broad definition that the non-hunter and the anti-hunter is taking. I get that, but it still doesn't really hold water.
Well, it doesn't. And the interesting thing, and I think I quoted this back when that thread was going on, there was a study done a couple years ago that was a nonpartisan poll, nationwide poll done to examine every aspect of hunting. That was random. They just randomly picked people for this poll, and I don't know how many they had, but it was a lot. And it was the most comprehensive poll ever done on the attitudes toward hunting. And while a huge majority of people disapproved of trophy hunting, by almost the same margin, people approved of predator control.
Yep.
Which is there's a lot of incongruity there because the lion, that's predator control. And here in Colorado, we need to have lions shot. I'm sorry, but our mule deer are in trouble and we're saturated with lions and not very many people are hunting them, especially in this front range urban wildland corridor where it's all fragmented with public and private. Nobody's hunting lions. They're killing a tremendous number of mule deer. Our mule deer population is declining, and people would be okay if it came out that, well, she killed a mule deer, killed the mountain lion to help the mule deer population. But
Yep.
we don't get to frame the argument. It's a picture frames the argument.
Yeah. Well, it's the 24-hour news cycle, debacle where we want to enrage people as quickly as we can. And, the only good thing about that is a lot of that stuff blows over after a couple of days, but how much damage is done. And, that what you mentioned about the incongruity with people who are, all for predator control, but against bears and lions and everything else being hunted. That's just an example of, the absolute disconnect from actually what's going on. If you don't even understand what that means, if you can hear those two questions and you're just like, I'm going to answer these this way. If you answer it the way they did, they don't understand what's going on already. Like you already lost them because they have no clue what's going on. And, when you're explaining that, what I'm thinking is what I hear all the time, like, well, the lions were here first, the bears were here first, so we just need to step away and let nature take its course. And it's like, yeah, that's a great like philosophy to take, except for we are here and our highways are here and our roads are here and our consumptive lifestyles and our resource extraction, we exist, and that's not going to change. So now you got to take these animals in the same, like, in their existence with us. Like they're not, you can't separate the two. This isn't like some wild place never untouched by man. So that argument, oh, they're here and they'll let everything level off because that's what nature does. That doesn't exist anymore. We're a part of it. So Lou, one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you on this Hunt for Real podcast is, not to totally pivot here, but it's because you've got a pretty solid reputation as being a guy who's devoted to elk and who's got elk figured out pretty well in a state where a lot of people go elk hunting, like we've talked about. And I'm always curious because I have a huge hole in my game when it comes to elk. I suck at elk hunting. I love it. I don't know what I'm doing. And so when I get to talk to somebody like you, and we talk quite a bit about it, I feel like I learned so much. And I've seen from your articles that they're really well received because you have a way of communicating that's pretty relatable to somebody who might be coming from the Midwest or the East. Sometimes some of the Western hunters I run across, they don't translate their message as well. I guess I'll say that, or it's just harder to digest their information. But you've got it broken down pretty well, and this is probably partially just from so much time that you've spent hunting elk, right?
Well, it's a combination. It's the time I've spent hunting elk, but more importantly, it's the fact that I try to mentor 2 or 3 or 4 like Midwestern newbie guys every year. And this is mentoring from the time they start virtual scouting to talking about where they're going to hunt, how they're going to hunt, how they want to hunt, how they perceive the hunt. And then I follow up with them afterward. That's part of the deal. That I want to know what happened. I want to know what went down. Did it exceed your expectation? Did it meet them? Did the things that I tell you happen to come true? And the dynamic of hunting in a state like Colorado, where bow hunting is growing so fast, and back to what you originally said, it's because licenses are easy to get. There's tons of public land. There's a lot of elk. And the dynamic of elk hunting here is changing constantly, because back when there used to be only 15 or 20,000 bow hunters, and now there's 45,000 elk bow hunters, I think. The elk behaved differently. The hunters behaved differently. Public land hunting was different. And so I have to continually adapt and figure out what and how and change tactics versus how guys hunt in other places where they don't have as much pressure and they don't have the growth of hunting and it's more limited. So I want to help guys. I mean, I obviously, I don't like the fact that there's 45,000 elk hunters here, and sometimes you can't swing a dead cat without hitting 5 guys all dressed up in Sitka marching through the woods single file honking on hoochie mama calls, but it's a reality. So I would rather have people hunting well and not screwing it up for everybody else than just barging around in the woods. And I think that's a big part of why I try to help people.
You just perfectly described me going through the elk woods there, by the way. That's... clad in Sitka and honking away on my hoochie mamas. That's all I got going on for elk. So when you're talking about how your strategies have changed as this influx of elk hunters has come into the state, is it something like, you're calling way less because the elk are way more call shy, or you getting 10 miles in, or are you hunting 1 mile in and letting everybody walk past you, or what's going on there?
I am calling way less. Bulls used to just come running in. You could get up close to one and bugle, and he'd come running in. Now they sneak in, and they come in silently, and they want to see who that is because they've been called to. I don't know if there's an elk in Colorado. I don't care how far in you go that hasn't been called to and been busted by a hunter. And so they sneak in. They take 30 minutes to get in there, and they come tiptoeing in, and they'll stand 100 yards out and stare at the spot where the callings come from. And then they'll move in, tiptoe in 50 yards, and then they'll circle over. The other thing that you touched on there, it's partly because I've gotten older too, and I hunt solo most of the time now, that my hunting partner has gotten injured and he can't hunt with me anymore. But I hunt closer to the roads because so many guys are going back in. And this is the thing that I have to try to pound into the newer Midwestern guys that I'm helping every year, is that the farther in you go, the more hunters you're likely to encounter, because everybody has this dream. They've got this vision of they want to dress up in their little costume and they want to put on their outfit and they want to put their backpack with all the latest, greatest lightweight backpacking gear and go in 5 miles, and they're going to find this valley, this nirvana that's like Yellowstone, where elk are bugling and running back and forth. And they find out that when they get in there, they're running into more elk more hunters than they are elk. And I had a situation with a couple guys that I was helping from, I don't remember, I think they were from Pennsylvania, and they were insistent on going into this one wilderness area that's near where I hunt. I nibble around the edges of wilderness areas. I hunt maybe a mile in at the most, a mile and a half at the very most, because that's about as far out as I can get an elk by myself. Mm-hmm. But it's elk get pushed down. So these guys were insistent that they were going to go to this trailhead and go in 5 miles, and they were going to camp in this meadow, and they were going to be into elk. And I tried to explain to them that every year I probably have 5 or 6 people ask me about that very place. You can't even find a spot to park in the parking lot. So they did it. They went in there. They went in 5 miles, made their camp. And in a week, they saw 7 elk and they saw 21 other hunters. And I hear that every year. I hear it all the time. You go to these trailheads, and they're a wilderness trailhead, and there will be 35, 40, 45 vehicles there. And a good portion of those people are hunters.
Yep. Well, so I want to ask you about that, because especially in my last experience hunting elk in Colorado, which was 2 years ago, I had that mentality, get in as far as possible. And as soon as I did that, I started running into outfitters in there who had ridden horseback in there. So they had completely negated the value of hiking in that far. And the elk that I ended up finding were in the nastiest, breakiest, roughest stuff that I could get into. And it wasn't necessarily elk that were far away. It was just elk in places that just really sucked to try to get through, the blowdowns and the kind of thing that just makes it miserable. And it had nothing to do with, or at least this is my theory, it had nothing to do with how far away it was from the trailhead, and everything to do with what that individual spot offered as far as how difficult it was to get through. Is that something you run into?
There is something that's been true ever since humans started hunting elk, and that is that elk are where people aren't bothering them. And they will move long distances at night to come down to feed. They'll move long distances early in the morning to go back to bed. But where they are traveling, where they are bedding, and where they're living is where people don't bother them. And that can be a half a mile or a quarter of a mile from a road. That can be 20 miles back into the middle of the Frank Church wilderness. But it's wherever nobody bothers them. And the two biggest public land elk that I have seen during season in the past 3 or 4 years were both within, one was a quarter of a mile of a main county road where people are backpacking in everywhere because there's wilderness areas on either side, and within a quarter of a mile of a state highway on Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock in the middle of bow season, on the Friday afternoon before muzzleloader season was going to start. And here was this 360 to 370 bull feeding at the edge of the timber. And so we didn't have licenses for that unit. Our tag was for the next unit over. So we tried to find some bow hunters who had a tag, and nobody did. So we scared him back up into the trees. But because we didn't want a muzzleloader hunter to decide to start the season a day or half a day early. Yep. And he was right there where somebody could have just stopped on that state highway and shot him. But the point being, those bulls were there because nobody bothered them.
Yep.
And guys are parking and walking back into the wilderness. And when you've got 21 people back in a wilderness area in one valley, they're going to touch every part of that valley in some way, whether it's their wind blowing 300 yards away, their thermals dropping down, calling the wrong way, whatever. They're going to be bothering those elk. But the elk next to the roads a lot of times don't get bothered. And this is nasty stuff. I mean, I'm not talking about, nice open meadows and stuff. I'm talking about little tiny clearings next to the road below um, north facing slopes where they bed, where there's nasty deadfall, there's horrible stuff. Nobody would think to park there just randomly and walk up
Yep.
in there. That's why the elk live there.
Yep. You know what's interesting to me about that is, I have way more experience hunting whitetails, obviously, and I do a lot of over the road whitetail trips where I go hunt public land in whatever state, and I've never been there before, and I give myself 4 or 5 days, and I've started to realize how much in common there is between finding where elk live and finding where public land whitetails live, and it's all about sort of rewiring what you should traditionally believe about them and getting into where the sign is, regardless of whether you're hiking way in or whether it's right by the road or something. Those critters that get that level of pressure have us figured out so well, and most of us go out and do the same things that the next group of hunters do and the next group of hunters do. And I'm starting to see, it's like a minor like micro level, but I'm starting to see on my whitetail hunts, if I show up in Oklahoma or somewhere else, it feels the same, where I got to get out there and I got to forget what I think I know and look for where that sign is right now. And if I find it, I have to hunt it, because those deer are there for the same reason those elk are in those spots you're talking about. People, for whatever reason, are walking past or overlooking it or something.
Well, they are, and on the other side, and I'm glad you mentioned that about sign, because I wanted to touch on that. Too many people hunt sign, and they don't understand that elk can leave a herd of elk can leave a lot of sign behind, and they can be 5 miles away from where they were the day before. Just in their natural travels, they can be a couple miles away, and people will hunt morning sign in the evenings. They'll hunt evening sign in the morning if they don't understand how the elk move. But on a bigger scale, and I'll give you a quick example here. There's a mountain where I used to hunt, and this is a big mountain, and it's all public land, but there's private ranches down at the bottom of it. And this mountain is about 5 miles across at the bottom as the crow flies, and it's about 3.5 to 4 miles from where the private land fence is that goes up to the top of the mountain. So everybody knows now, they didn't used to, but everybody knows now that there's 300 or 400 elk that are summering on that mountain. And those elk are there on opening day of archery season. And because enough people know, locals know, the word's gotten out, some guys from Wisconsin started out, there were 2 of them, and now there's a camp of 16. And they attack these elk. People attack these elk from every direction because it's a roadless mountain. So people come in from one side, they come in from the other side. Some even come up from the bottom through the private land. And by day 4, these 400 elk are gone. They are literally left. They've fled across the sagebrush. They've found refuge on these big private ranches where there's either bow hunting or a little bit of bow hunting or no hunting till rifle season. And I have been in places where I've seen them go across the sagebrush in the middle of the day like a caribou migration. So by day 4, they're gone. The whole mountain's been cleaned out. It used to be we could hunt that mountain the whole season and hunt it carefully, but now the next group of hunters comes week 2. The first group, they're gone, their vacation's over, they've gone home. The next bunch of guys come. They get in there, there's sign everywhere. The trails are rototilled, like just through the bedding timber. There's week-old poop here and there, and there's sign from elk moving through, getting out of there, and there's no elk on that mountain, and everybody is like completely puzzled and perplexed. Why aren't there any elk? So you really have to. Hunting sign is good, but you really have to find elk. That's what's more important.